Hello and welcome to my talk. My name's Denise Dupont. I'm a PhD student from Lancaster University and I'm researching what is the experience of a migrant job seeker looking for work online. So in this talk I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my research and why I'm doing it. I'll explain the theoretical background and then we'll go through a specific job application and some findings and possible implications. I'm researching what is the experience of a migrant job seeker looking for work online, partly because technology is pretty much intertwined with our daily lives. The UK government has also been following a digital by default agenda since around 2011, which means most of their services have now moved online and resulting in the closure of many offices. We can even be said to be in the era of technological compulsion nowadays, which means that we have no choice but to go online. And an example of that is the 2012 Welfare Act, in which benefit claimants are mandated to maintain an online presence or face sanctions. And this is particularly important for job seekers who are now mandated to prove that they're looking for work online and show evidence of that through the government's Find a Job website. Around the same time, there's been 54% cuts to adult education funding, and the employment support program that was introduced in 2013 is only partly funded. So if it's going to be very easy for you to move into employment, you'll be directed to the work program. If you have longer term needs, you'll be directed to the third sector, to a charity work club, which is one of the sites for my data collection. So basically, if you're in need of ESOL at a low level, for example, entry 1 to entry 3, or IT, basic IT skills, and you're in need of employment support, you probably end up heavily reliant on charities for that. There's a dearth of literature on online job seeking literacy practices. There's plenty of stuff about each of these separate strands, but nothing that brings it all together through the lens of literacy, and so that's what I'm attempting to plug in my research. In this section, I'm going to talk about the theoretical framework I've used to answer my research questions. In the slide, you can see a diagram of my interpretation of mediated discourse analysis, which has several key themes: discourses, practices, identity, actions, and sites of engagement. By discourses, I mean patterned and recognizable ways of thinking, being, and doing. And these result from social relations and taking part in social processes. So as we take part in social processes, we draw on discourses and perform certain practices. So participating in certain practices identifies us as members of particular groups. And this is important because this is where the connection between practice and action occurs. So if you're a member of a particular group, you will be familiar with its practices and you'll be able to subconsciously perform it in a seamless manner. However, if you're an outsider, then when faced with participating in an unfamiliar practice, your attention will be focused on that moment and you'll be focused at the level of action. So action is the unit of analysis that's used in mediated discourse analysis. So when the participant's attention is engaged at that action, at that level of action, that's what we call a site of engagement, and a site of engagement opens up a whole trajectory of actions and texts, and this is what I'm using to answer my first question: What discourses and practices intersect in an online job application? And for research question 2, I'm interested in what decisions people make. How do they make those decisions? How do they decide what to write? How do they decide what job to apply for? And so in that case, I'm really interested in the individual circumstances, needs, wants, obligations, and what resources can the individual draw, and what practices and discourses are they familiar with. So this is a photograph of the work club where I gathered my data. It's staffed by volunteers and all the equipment's been donated. And if you can see that pole in the foreground, that's holding up the ceiling, which gives you an idea of how limited the infrastructure is in this place. My participants are Brian. He's a volunteer. He's an English speaker, and well, he's British. And JK and Selden are a married couple in their late 50s, early 60s, and they're unemployed work club clients. They're originally from Bhutan and have very limited educational background, but they've been in the UK 6 years, and they do have sort of ESOL entry level 1 speaking, and I would say the same for their literacy as well, if we want to map it onto the core curriculum. And their task here is to complete 2 full-time job searches, but they only have 1.5 hours to do that, and they're turning to Brian for help. So as you can imagine, they're quite under pressure for time. So on the screen you can see an application for a glass collecting job in a pub, which Brian has decided is appropriate for Selden because it doesn't require a driving licence, it doesn't require any particular skills except being enthusiastic and sociable and hardworking, all of which he thinks that Selden is. So the application takes 11 minutes from start to finish, and I divided it into 3 stages: preparing to apply, applying, and recording the application, and you can see the timings there. The first thing I'd like to point out is looking at the computer terminal. There's a sticker at the top that says all work must be saved to USB flash drives. So it really points to the limited IT infrastructure in this work club. There's no network and there's no personal storage space on these computers. Anybody can log into any terminal using the same password. So really, if you don't have a USB stick and you're not comfortable with cloud computing, it's quite difficult to retrieve information that you may have worked with earlier. So you can see the application methods on this job advert. They're Facebook, LinkedIn and Google. And the job advert itself is a real hybrid of marketing and recruitment. So there's not much detail in it about the work itself, but plenty of sales talk about how great an opportunity it is to join a wonderful global high achieving company. So both the application methods and the body text of the advert belong to a discourse about globally networked people who use technology for professional and social purposes, unfettered by time or space. A very privileged group of people, actually, not a group that Selden and JK belong to, who are unemployed and low educated and have very limited access to economic resources to develop their skills in any way. And in a similar way, Brian also doesn't appear to belong to this group, at least not for using IT for work or job application purposes, as we'll see in the next section. So this is stage 1 of the application. It takes 4 minutes, and all Brian is doing in this 4 minutes is looking for Selden's CV. Now he can't find the CV because she doesn't have a USB stick and there's no private storage space on any of the computers for an individual to save anything. And Brian's really unfamiliar with cloud computing, so this is a really difficult thing for him. He does realise that he can retrieve the CV through her sent emails, but he clicks around all over the place, looking in her Google account to see where on earth he can possibly locate the CV, and instead of using the search bar, he actually scrolls through 11 pages of sent emails before he can find the one that's got her CV in. So he just shows himself not to be practiced, not to be one of those people for whom this kind of application was designed. This is stage 2 of the application, and Brian is filling in the application form for Selden. As you can see, it's a really straightforward application form. It asks for contact details and simple questions like how will you get to work. Normally, when Brian's helping Selden and JK, they give him their personal notebooks which have all the login details for their various email and recruitment accounts, and Brian will use those notebooks to fill in any applications on their behalf. So in other words, they completely entrust him with the whole process, and they don't usually interrupt or contradict anything that he does or says. But in this instance, there's a very unusual...
How many hours are you available to work, and on which days, times of the week? What's best time for you? Shall we put both day and nights? Flexible. Do you know what flexible means? Flexible hours means you can work any time between 11 till 11 o'clock at night. Yeah? Flexible. Flexible hours? Yeah.
So as you heard in the last slide, JK unusually interrupts Brian to contest the idea of flexibility as a positive quality. JK and Selden are a couple, a husband and wife, who are mutually concerned for each other's well-being and safety. Neither of them is happy with the idea of Selden working at night. But here they're positioned as utterly dependent on Brian, and their legitimate concerns are subordinated to the discourse of benefits compliance, which expects that job seekers will take any reasonable work and be flexible about when, where and how they work. The second thing worth noticing is that their own Selden's own alphabetical and digital literacies aren't drawn on. She is capable of reading and understanding those questions, and she's got enough basic keyboard and alphabetic skills to type in her own personal contact details, but she's never asked to do that. So there are really limited opportunities for self-development, and that's really related to the amount of time it takes to do these applications. So after submitting that application form, Brian was uncertain whether he'd really succeeded or not in applying for that job, and he returned to Selden's Gmail and was checking through other job alerts when suddenly this email popped up. So he's very pleased to receive confirmation that it has indeed gone through. But if you look at the text of this email, you can see it refers to a candidate account. So Selden has opened yet another recruitment account. And the second thing is that it sets her yet another task, another action and text trajectory, if you like, because it invites her to visit the place where she's applying to work, so to visit the pub, and leave a review of her experience. So she's expected to go to the pub, then write about it and upload it to one of these blogs that you can see on the left. So it really sets her off on an action and text trajectory, which is unanticipated, I would say, and quite different from what we usually think of as a text trajectory. So instead of a text travelling between different people in one direction, There's one person dealing with multiple synchronous, often ephemeral texts in an unanticipated trajectory. It's going who knows where, actually. And there are powerful discourses in the site of engagement. There's marketing, globalization, benefits compliance, individual employability narratives, and participants' practices and discourses are shown to be very different from the practices of the recruitment agency. The glass collecting job is a good example of that. The job doesn't require any particular skills, just some personal qualities, and yet the method of application is quite complex. So I think that this obstructs rather than connects manual workers with employment. We can also see that attention is shifted away from the job seeker's legitimate concerns, and even the volunteers' intentions can be compromised. So, for example, in this application, Brian, with the best of intentions, wants to apply for reasonable jobs for Selden to meet her job-seeking targets, but in fact he applies for a job that she wouldn't really be happy to do, and neither would her husband. So these powerful discourses are acting to marginalise the people who are applying for the jobs. In conclusion then, digital compulsion works against opening up opportunities and reducing dependency for job seekers. Agency is limited at the level of operation, so a situated approach to employability courses needs to consider recruitment practices as well as employer practices. So we need to think about both. If, for example, you want to teach IT for job seekers, what particular software suites should you be teaching? Think about what recruiters are expecting people to do as part of a job application. They're expecting them to open recruitment accounts. They're expecting applicants to connect those with different social media platforms. They're expecting them to be able to upload and download and manage digital documents across various platforms. These are quite sophisticated things to be able to do, and yet even for the most basic job, that's what an application requires. And beyond reading and writing CVs and cover letters, what other genres should be included? Maybe it's more important to focus on the kind of social media posts that you might write about yourself if you're looking for a job. Or could it be that you should learn to write restaurant reviews if you're hoping for a job as a kitchen porter? Who knows? But they're all things to be considered. And finally, the activity system that job seekers find themselves in, it's a system of social relations. So migrants often don't realise how social networks in the world of work operate in this country and in this culture. And I think it's important to help job seekers to recognise the existing networks to which they belong, people who they might be able to approach for advice or to help them form a career identity. They don't need to be close friends. They can just be looser connections, what we sometimes call bridging capital. But it's not always obvious what the social relations are in a new environment. So if people are helped to recognise these and to learn accepted ways of approaching people and asking for help, for example, if you're a graduate, how to use your alumni network, then people can have more agency to develop themselves and develop a potential career identity. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found this interesting. Interruption from JK.